the pain and suffering Giants fans have endured this offseason is likely to last a long time. There's no looking past it. It's been a disaster with how things have unfolded. But that doesn't stop the offseason from proceeding and the season from coming up. And so the Giants have work to do. And there are reports that they're interested in outfielder Michael Conforto. So we'll get into Conforto, what their interest level is, and more about Carlos Correa next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide actually 3 episodes a week for now, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. As I said yesterday, maybe. We'll see. They're losing people here. Anyway, coming up on today's show, we're going to get more into the heartbreak behind the Carlos Correa situation. A few more details coming out. Correa reportedly going to have his physical in New York today, so that's going to be really interesting to follow. Some quotes from Scott Boras, his agent, about what happened with the Giants there. But I wanted to start by talking about Michael Conforto because, as I said, the offseason is going to go on. If you want my initial reaction to the Carlos Correa situation, check out yesterday's episode when that was the whole topic. But we discussed yesterday, actually, a little bit about what can the Giants do now. And we just kind of set out a roadmap and said they might have to make trades, which would be a bummer because, yes, you can bring in some good players, but you'd be sacrificing future value with the trades with the players you give up. And that in the free agent market, there just aren't those types of impact players left. They've all signed elsewhere now with Correa. I mean, it's pending a physical in New York. Let's just be clear about that. He hasn't officially signed with the Mets either, so we'll see what happens with that. I would imagine it gets done. But we focused yesterday on Jean Segura simply because by Steamer projections, he had the best 2023 projection of the players left. And that was to make, for me, using him as an example was to make a point about how the remaining class is not so strong. But enter Michael Conforto. And the reason I'm so interested in this is because last offseason, he was one of the guys that was near the top of my list of players the Giants ought to be interested in. And I was super surprised when, he didn't sign deep into the offseason. The lockout happened. The lockout ended. He was still out there. Seemed like the Giants would try to make a move, and they didn't. But then we found out at some point pretty late in the process that he had a shoulder injury at a workout in January and that he ended up actually having season-ending shoulder surgery in April of 2022. And so enter 2023 and the present day, and we've got Susan Slusser of the San Francisco Chronicle and Alex Pavlovich of NBC Sports Bay Area reporting that the Giants, according to sources, are indeed interested in Michael Conforto. And we've had reports that they were interested in him, very interested last year, before ultimately, obviously, he had a serious injury and had season-ending surgery, so that ended it. And the other thing about him is that last year, he had the qualifying offer attached to him, and that seemed at the time to me like a reason perhaps that his market was a little bit slow. But this year, the fact that he didn't sign last offseason, there's no more qualifying offer. And so he does actually represent one of the better possibilities for the Giants moving forward. I know some of you just don't even care, and I don't blame you for that, but life does go on, and they are going to continue to have an off season, and the season is going to come upon us. And some have said, why even bother because they're horrible. I don't quite view it that way. I think they're kind of sort of where they were last year. At this point, you lose Rodon, but you replace him with 2 solid pitchers versus, Manaea had a bad 2022. I'll make no bones about it. But he was otherwise good for the previous 4 or 5 years of his career. And so bounce back candidate. The Giants have had a lot of success with pitchers. And Ross Stripling is kind of the opposite, where he actually is coming off a great 2022 season. So anyway, the rotation deeper but less upside, but then Kyle Harrison likely to factor in, and that provides the upside potentially. So I'm cool with their starting rotation. I just think their bullpen and position player mix needs work, and the position player mix needs a lot of work, and I would anticipate they're going to make several more moves as the offseason goes on here. And to me, adding Michael Conforto is, in fact, one of the best things they could do. And yeah, like I was trying to say, I think that they're not quite as bad as some fear, and they're certainly not an obvious playoff team, but if you're around a 500 team and you add a few more players, then you're going to be in the mix for that wild card position with so many teams making the playoffs now. That might not excite you, but it's just, to me, the reality of the situation that, I mean, they were kind of in the mix last year and a lot went wrong. And so it's not hard at all to see them kind of being in the mix in 2023, even without Correa and Judge and all those guys. So Conforto, I think that a lot of people have asked me when I was tweeting about this, like the situation with him missing all of 2022 with an injury. How can the Giants be serious about signing this guy and having him pass a physical when they did? The reason Carlos Correa was like in the hotel ready to be introduced, and it's heartbreaking. We'll get into some of the details there with his family at the hotel as well. And that the physical held up the whole process and blew up the whole deal, and ended up with him agreeing to terms with another team pending a physical. But the difference is, this is a key difference. For Conforto, we're talking about a guy who's likely to get a Carlos Rodon type deal when Rodon came to the Giants, 2 years with an opt-out. We know the Giants are cool with those deals, and for Correa, though, it's a 13-year commitment. And so if you have a legitimate medical concern, which, there are a lot of theories that this was just kind of cold feet, but my opinion is that there was a legitimate medical concern for the long haul. If Correa was a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, you take the risk, absolutely. But if you're about to sign a guy for 13 years, and you have doctors telling you this issue that we're seeing, we think is going to cause him to break down, probably, or at least there's a high likelihood of it. Whatever, we don't know. And that's part of the issue, is that we haven't been given any details because they can't talk about his medical. They can't just publicly speak on a player's medical condition, especially before he's officially signed with a new team. Imagine that would be the lawsuits. I'm not a lawyer, but you can't like slander a player and talk about their health when they're trying to sign a new deal with a team. They just can't do that. And so anyway, they're willing to take on players with injury risk like Carlos Rodon, Alex Cobb, Alex Wood, Anthony DeSclafani, Tommy La Stella, on and on and on. They've signed players with injury risk and concern, but we're talking like 2 or 3 year deals. There's a huge difference between 2 or 3 years and 13. And so I don't think it's much of a concern when you talk about Conforto. It's a risk, but it's not a 13-year risk. And so I think they're okay with risk if it's short term. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, what would they be getting if they got Conforto? Because, hey, you might have the opinion, and I wouldn't blame you for this either, that why would they be likely to get this guy when they just strike out on seemingly every target they have? So we'll get into that and the numbers and why Conforto, to me, would be a pretty darn good addition for the Giants in just a minute. But before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis, hands down. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. We've got it all at BetOnline.net, including MLB offseason odds. Man, it was a lot of fun going through those odds with you throughout the offseason. Sadly, Correa doesn't officially have a team yet, so we'll see if it ends up being the New York Mets. I would be shocked if he doesn't end up signing there, but I don't know. Just following the probabilities throughout the offseason has been a lot of fun, and we're going to, coming up, probably have over-under on win totals for the Giants. We advised a couple years ago to look into those Gabe Kapler Manager of the Year odds, and he ended up winning it, so I hope somebody took me up on that. Anyway, they've got it all at BetOnline, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to dive a little bit more into Michael Conforto, and I know some people just will not be satisfied no matter what they do from this point on, and I can't emphasize enough that I don't blame you. But hey, from my perspective, I got to keep talking about the Giants. I want to keep talking about the Giants. It's heartbreaking. I've just been crushed by this team this offseason, and as a fan, I mean, I think a lot of you are in the exact same boat, and so I don't blame you. But life does go on. The world keeps on turning, and like I said, spring training will come around, the season will come around, that schedule will begin, and they've got baseball to play, and so all we can do is look forward. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today as your second listen. The biggest stories of around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So Michael Conforto, I made this tweet, not that it matters that I tweeted it, but what was interesting to me when I looked is that between 2017 and 2020, so that's 4 seasons, including the short 2020 season, 17, 18, 4 seasons, Michael Conforto averaged 4.6 Fangraphs wins above replacement per 600 plate appearances, which is about a full season of work. And he had a 133 weighted runs created plus, meaning about 33% above average offense over that span. And so this is like I was really high on this guy I thought that he was a great target for the San Francisco Giants. He checks a lot of the boxes for what the Giants like in terms of he doesn't really chase out of the zone, like consistently runs really good chase rates of around 27%. His career walk rate is 12.1%, which is very, very healthy. Strikeout rate is like average at around 24%. Career isolated power of 214, which is way better than average. Career weighted runs created plus of 124. He had a down 2021 season going into free agency, and then he had the shoulder injury. And so it was kind of a bad time. If he had reached free agency after the 2020 season instead of the 2021 season, this is a guy who would have easily landed a deal north of $100 million. He's still only 29 years old. He turns 30 on March 1st, and he is a Scott Boras client. He is, and some have mentioned that as well as like, why would Scott Boras like work with the Giants after what went down with Correa? And Correa is a Boras client as well. So, but to me, I don't see that as a holdup because Boras is kind of beholden to his clients. And if the Giants are the best fit for Michael Conforto, if they're offering him the best deal, then he's going to pursue it. They're not just going to ignore the Giants. That would be foolish. Scott Boras knows he has to kind of set emotions aside when he's dealing with these clients. That being said, there's no doubt that the Giants had some damage to their reputation from this situation, but I think signing a Boras client immediately afterwards could actually go a long way, perhaps, to mending those bridges. So I don't really see that as a major holdup. If you're offering him the best deal, you're offering him the best deal. And also, like, they've signed other Boras clients who have had health concerns, like Carlos Rodon, and that worked out just fine. It worked. I mean, and Boras understands they helped Rodon get that huge contract that he got and earn his 5% commission on. And so they're not just going to ignore the Giants from this point forward. And so I don't view that as a major obstacle. It could be that players are like, ooh, I don't know about the way that this went down with Correa. And I'm sure Correa's not happy. The fans are not happy. There's no doubt reputational damage. But anyway, Michael Conforto, what else are you getting? He's an outfielder. He's a corner outfielder. He's one of these guys who's played some center field, but is better in a corner. He's played 1,100 innings in his career in center and 2,000 innings in left. These are approximate, and 2,600 innings in right. And so way more innings in the corner outfields and in the corner outfield positions, and he's been pretty darn good in those corner outfield spots. I've read that teams have some concerns about his arm, like throwing arm, after the shoulder injury, because it was his right shoulder. He throws right-handed. He bats left-handed. He also does have pretty he has platoon splits, but the thing is he's just like so good against right-handed pitching and like decent against left-handed pitching. Did I say that right? So good against righties and decent against lefties. So I'm not sure that he's a guy that you would need to platoon, because unlike with, say, Jock Peterson, who's like way below average offense when he's facing lefties, Conforto's just like okay when he's facing lefties, but a monster when he's facing righties, at least in his career. And so I think that you could rest him against some tough lefties, but he's not necessarily a platoon player. And Conforto in a corner and Haniger in another corner, and then Yastrzemski and Slater kind of platooning in center, I think it's just a good kind of buy low opportunity for the Giants. And look, I would just give him the Carlos Rodon deal. Just give him 2 years, $44 million guaranteed with the opt-out and call it a day. Probably ends up costing a little less than that. I've kind of guessed maybe between 30 and 40 million over 2 years with an opt-out. But the Giants might have to overpay here, because you'd be getting a position player, a left-handed hitter, and trying to convince them to come to Oracle Park, of all places, to rebuild offensive value. I was skeptical about Cody Bellinger choosing the Giants when he was non-tendered, and a lot of people were claiming that, they say the Giants love these short-term deals, and so it's a perfect fit. But if you think about it from the player's perspective, it's far from a perfect fit to go to the San Francisco Giants when you're a hitter. It's the total opposite as pitchers, and for good reason, right? It's a pitcher's park. I know it has changed since they moved in the fences. It's a little more neutral, but power is still way down. Like if you're trying to hit homers, this is not the place to be, especially as a left-handed hitter. And yeah, I mean, you're just going to kind of see your home runs dry up. And that's a big part of Conforto's game, except I do just want to mention that I looked at Conforto's career home runs overlaid at Oracle Park, and it seems to work pretty well. Like he has a lot of pull power down the right field line. And so right down the line at Oracle Park is super shallow. So if you can consistently hit the ball like right down the line as a left-handed hitter, that could work out just fine, actually. And he hits a lot of balls out to left for a left-handed hitter. It's very unusual for guys to kind of consistently hit the ball out to the opposite field, but he does that, and that could play okay. And then center field is very accessible now at Oracle Park, being only 391 feet away to dead center field. So I think it would work, and I think the Giants would have to overpay, and he'd have to have no better option, because like kind of any team with a better ballpark offering him a similar deal would be a probably better fit for Michael Conforto in terms of rebuilding his offensive value. But if the Giants are reportedly interested, they were interested last year, then it makes a lot of sense from their perspective. And I would be happy with this. It obviously wouldn't be Correa. I totally understand if you just don't care if they were to sign Conforto, but they might do it anyway. Anyway, coming up in just a minute, the latest on the Carlos Correa situation, just some of the quotes from Scott Boras and what we know about what the heck went down there with the press conference being canceled and then things just deteriorating from there. So more about that in just a second. But first, did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think that law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell, so everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different, and driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI, paid for by NHTSA. All right, as promised, we're going to just get a little bit more into the latest with what we know about this deterioration of the Carlos Correa situation. It's just tragic from a fan perspective to read this stuff. I think more than anything, it's just painful as a fan to have gone through this. And the team is, responsible. Even if there was a legitimate medical issue, it's like they did this to you by like Correa was ready. He was in the hotel. Scott Boras was there. Correa's wife, his wife's parents, his brother, we're all there at the hotel. And 3 hours before he was scheduled to show up at the press conference, and 30 minutes before he was scheduled to go on the radio and do an interview on KNBR, Farhan Zaidi Boras is saying, I guess, that Farhan Zaidi called him at around 8 a.m. and said, this is what he said, quote, Farhan Zaidi, reported to me that they needed more time, more evaluation. They had not made any decisions, but they weren't prepared to go ahead with a news conference because they didn't feel they would be able to collect the information within that short period of time. And then he continues. He says a lot of stuff. I'm just going to read them in order of as it's written in this piece in the Mercury News from today. Continuing, he says, we've had 3 teams offer this player contracts in excess of 10 years. Obviously, every one of them had their medicals. There's no current issue with Carlos's health whatsoever. There's been a lot of discussion about backs and ankles. There's nothing about him that is currently any form of medical issue. All the conjecture and evaluation of him has been about physicians using their crystal ball for years to come, end quote. So I just want to interject here. This is what I believe to be the truth of the situation. And Boras is telling us that it's the truth. I don't buy personally, and you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to mine. I don't care. If you have a different opinion, that's totally fine to me. What I don't like is when people say to me, if you comment to me on Twitter with certainty about what this situation, if you think you know exactly what this was, that's what irritates me, because I don't know for sure. You don't know for sure. Only the Giants really know. And so we don't have any certainty here. And just acknowledge that. We don't know for sure exactly what happened here, and we may never. But what Scott Boras is saying is that all the conjecture and evaluation of him has been about physicians using their crystal ball for years to come. And this is what I've believed to be true since this all went down, is that they've got doctors telling the Giants, Giants doctors telling the Giants decision makers, there's this issue, and we think down the road this is going to be a problem. And when you're committing 13 years to a guy, that is a issue. And it depends on what the doctors are saying, right? And it could range from, they could give a percent likelihood that it causes problems. They could say this is likely to just end his career early. Who knows exactly what the issue is? What we've heard is that it had something to do with the leg injury he sustained in the minor leagues. There's been some reporting on that. He broke his fibula, I think it was, and had ligament damage that required surgery. I think it required surgery, but it was a broken leg and ligament damage, so we've heard. And Boras continues, we have a full account of the player prior to doing anything that has to do with offers. Got a long letter passing him. They say he had a physical at the end of the year in Minnesota, and there's a physician saying that he's okay. But doctors can disagree. And that's what Farhan Zaidi said in his statement, was that there was a disagreement over the results of the physical, over the interpretation of the physical. And I don't know. There's this is where it gets interesting. Boras says that he said to Farhan Zaidi in response to delaying this press conference, how much time do you need? They set the time. They told me that they needed 1 o'clock. They would let us know. Remember, the press conference was for 11, and so Farhan Zaidi told Scott Boras by 1 o'clock they would let him know. Then Boras says, we received notice from them that they wanted to continue to talk and that they needed more time. But at that point in time, I told them I had to have a decision whether they were going to honor their letter of agreement that we had reached. And they said at that point in time, they needed more information. They needed more discussion. They wanted to continue to talk, but at this time, they couldn't go forward. And then I advised them that I had to pursue alternative measures on behalf of Carlos with other teams. So that's the way this works. When they reach their 13-year, $350 million deal, they sign something that basically the player is then obligated to honor that contract pending a physical. So the team, if they want the player at those terms, if the results of the physical are to their liking, it's a done deal. The player can't leave. But essentially, Scott Boras said, you have until you pick the time, and they said 1 o'clock. And if you're not satisfied by then we are going to be able to get out of that obligation. And he's basically back on the free agent market. And that's what happened. And the Giants seemingly said, okay, you can put him back on the free agent market. That's how unhappy or concerned they were about the results of the physical, or so we are led to believe. Until we hear otherwise, the Giants are not commenting on this. How could they, though? I don't understand why people think that they could just come out and comment on this. They can't comment on his health. They can't just say, we were concerned that his ankle is going to break down and cause his career to end when he's 35 years old. They cannot say that at all. And plus, they can't even hint at it. It would be such bad form when he is technically still unsigned. I think after he signs, you might see some more, because then the Mets will have had their chances to do their own evaluation, and if they're okay with it and they sign, then the Giants can maybe say some things, perhaps. Maybe not, because you really can't comment on a player's medical stuff without their consent. And so anyway, that's just the latest. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Now make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, even if you hate the Giants, please consider rating it and leaving a review. Helps me out a lot. So thank you so much in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. That's 3 episodes for the week. So we're gonna have a long Christmas weekend. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everyone. We will, if a signing or something happens, we will do an emergency podcast. But otherwise, we'll be back with you next week. So I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.